Hey, Rockheads, this is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
Here to tell you that the folks who make the amazing NDC conference in Oslo, London, and Sydney are coming to America.
That's right. The first annual NDC Minnesota is May 7th to 10th at the St. Paul River Center in Minnesota.
Right now, you can get early bird pricing, only $800 for the conference itself.
But early bird pricing ends on February 17th, so go to ndcminnesota.com today and register.
And tell them Carl and Richard sent you. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
Here with a very, what I think is going to be a very interesting show today. I won't give too much of it away, but you probably read the description. Richard, as a way to jump into this topic, in coming to the studio today, I had an experience that made me find this. So I'll just roll the music. I'll tell you what I'm talking about.
Okay. All right, dude, what do you got?
So this is a blog post by Terry Myerson, who's Executive VP on Windows and Devices Group. And it's on Microsoft Secure Blog. It's protecting customers from being intimidated into making unnecessary purchases.
Interesting.
So apparently, there's been an increase in free programs that basically say, yeah, we'll fix up your computer, we'll scan for errors, we'll make everything faster.
Yeah.
And then they scare you using coercive messaging to buy a premium version to correct the problems that it actually caused in the first place. It's really, really nasty. It purportedly fixes the problems that are discovered by the free version, but whether it actually creates problems or not, I don't know. But there's just been this spate of things. So this is right from the blog. To help protect customers from receiving such coercive messaging, we're updating our evaluation criteria to specify that programs must not use alarming or coercive messaging that can put pressure on customers into making a purchase or performing other actions. So they use the evaluation criteria to determine what programs are identified as malware and unwanted software.
Interesting.
Isn't that cool?
You're almost talking about it's reading the words that the app is saying and saying, does this look like a scam?
Right, right.
That's really an interesting place to be.
So their evaluation criteria is now updated to state that programs must not display alarming or coercive messages or misleading content to pressure you into paying for additional services or performing superfluous actions. So that this software might display characteristics like it reports errors in an exaggerated or alarming manner about the user's system. Gee, that's never happened before. Requires the user to pay for fixing the errors or issues monetarily or by performing other actions such as taking a survey, downloading a file, signing up for a newsletter, installing other stuff. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
So starting March 1st, Windows Defender and other Microsoft security products will classify programs that display this coercive messaging as unwanted software. Pretty cool.
Which gets back to the whole point, which is if you think there's something wrong with your machine, just let Defender do its job.
Right. Yeah.
You really don't need anything else.
Now, what's interesting is that when I was coming into the studio today, I just took a quick look at my email, and I got this email from a friend who's actually a fellow musician, plays in a band, and it was like, unexpected, ! was the subject. And I read it and I said, hey, Carl, it said, hey, Carl, I don't usually do this, but, and then a sob story about a cousin with cancer and has to raise some money and need a couple of $1,000. And if you're interested, if you can help me, let me know. So I didn't know anything about it. I just wrote him back and said, hey, I'm about to go to work here, but, send me the details. And so then I texted him and I said, hey, did you just send me an email? He goes, no, my email was hacked. Don't answer it.
Yeah, no, spear phishing. It's a classic.
But the thing is that it came from his account. So
yes,
somebody actually got into his email account, took it over and used it. Yeah.
Or at least made it look that way. I mean, it's interesting to dig into some of those hacks. But yeah, welcome to the world of the internet.
Yeah, well, I thought those two stories might be sort of relevant to the history of, what happened with .NET code running in the browser beforehand and all that stuff. So maybe that'll come up later.
Oh, perhaps. Okay.
Who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1455, the one we did with Mr. Sanderson back in July of 2017, talking about a thing called Blazor. Maybe you've heard of it.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, kicked off quite a few comments. It was kind of interesting, this idea of running C# in the browser, as prototypical as it was at the time. But Knox North had this comment about 6 months ago, where he said, wow, I was truly impressed by Steve Sanderson's assembly, pun intended, of a bunch of different technologies for getting .NET into the browser. And I don't know that he actually got .NET there. He got C# there, but As I was listening, I wanted to ask how he did debugging work. But a week or two later, Steve tweeted out about debugging C# in Chrome. Awesome. And then Miguel Diacaza had a post about C# and F# Hello World in mono in the browser.
Nice.
Richard and Carl, I hope you can have a show with Steve and or Miguel talking about these exciting developments.
Nah.
Nah.
We won't do that. Sorry. We got to draw the line somewhere.
Yeah, come on. It's all just, hype. I would much prefer, and this is the line that got me. I wanted to read this comment because I completely can relate to it. I would much prefer to have a development environment that was full stack C# from top to bottom. The disadvantage of having potentially one-time longer download could be offset by the aggressive caching of shared libraries. Both websites and web applications could be the exact same thing. Love the show. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's that was what we got excited about, is what if we could just use C# everywhere? What if the code I'd written on the back I could run on the front end? Like, it's just, we're all pretty excited about this.
We are.
So we're with you, Knox. Excited about the same things. Thank you so much for your comment. A .NET Rocks mug is on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media, because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet, and we might think about decrypting your hard drive. We might.
Look at you and your malware. Aren't you cute?
All right, let's introduce our guest. Steve Sanderson, of course, has been a guest on the show several times. He works as a developer on the ASP.NET team, sometimes building general MVC features, but mostly focusing on making it a great platform for JavaScript developers. Currently, he's shipping a set of ASP.NET project templates for Angular, React, Vue, and other SPA framework developers that add advanced functionality like server-side pre-rendering and instant updates on code changes. Daniel Roth is with us today. He's a program manager on the ASP.NET team working on ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET MVC, and ASP.NET Web API. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
So we got one in the UK and one in Redmond. So
yeah.
And Daniel has been on the show before. He was on a Web API panel at NDC London, the very first NDC London back in 2014.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 4 years ago.
Yeah, those were good days.
Well, I'm really glad you guys are here to talk about Blazor again. And the reason that we're having you on today is because you're making an announcement today, right?
That's right. Yep. Today we're announcing that we're bringing the Blazor project into the ASP.NET org on GitHub.
So what does that mean exactly?
Well, so initially, Steve Sanderson did the initial prototype. He had put it on his own GitHub private account and created quite a splash with what he demoed in NDC. And we found that pretty interesting on the ASP.NET team, and we've been spending the last 5-6 months trying to figure out, could this really be a thing? Is this have a future? Can you really do .NET in the browser? We're doing a bunch of technical investigations. Been talking to customers about their interest level in this technology. And we've decided that there's quite a bit of promise here. So what this means is now the project it's moving into our org. ASP.NET folks are now actively developing Blazor. It's currently in an experimental phase. Like it's not a committed product yet. So what that means is you shouldn't plan your next, production application to be built on Blazor quite yet. We're in what we're calling an experimental phase,
right?
Because we want to prove out the technical feasibility of Blazor. We want to continue to gauge the amount of customer demand. But we are actively working on it now. The repo is now public. You can go take a look at the code. You can build it. It's still really early in the project. There's nothing to download yet. So there's not even a release. If you want to see what Blazor looks like in action, by all means, go check out the prototypes that Steve had already shared, or check out his demo at NDC at Oslo. Those things are still available, but we are working as fast as we can to get to an initial release.
So, Steve, the last time we talked with you, you had just given the demo, and you proved the concept that you could do C# in the browser, and but I remember you saying that the parts of the framework that you had implemented were very limited.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that the rest of it couldn't be. It just wasn't yet.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So when I first put the prototype demo together, it was not in any particularly official capacity. I didn't have a lot of time to spend on it. It was originally just a demo for a conference presentation. So it really was just thrown together in the most like basic and amateurish, hacky kind of way that I possibly could, because I just needed to make it work as quickly as I could. So yeah, I just implemented whatever was needed to make the demo work and nothing else. So yeah, you absolutely couldn't build anything realistic on it. There were all kinds of limitations. There were limitations both in the framework that I'd built and also in the underlying platform, because at that time it was running on a third-party .NET framework, .NET runtime called DNA, which stands for .NET Anywhere, which was something made by one person and had not even been maintained for many years. So altogether, so many aspects of that prototype were just a demo. There was nothing you could really do to move it much further than that. But since we've had the authorization to start spending some proper time working on this, we've started again from the ground, taking all those learnings and building a similar set of concepts, although different in a few ways, but starting entirely from scratch and with the goal of making actual production capable implementation now. So everything that we build now is really intended to have the right kind of developer experience, the right kind of performance characteristics, to really support everything that you would want end to end. And that's of course a much bigger project than something you can just throw together in, a handful of weekends.
Steve, I think we talked about this 6 months ago, but why did you pick .NET Anywhere? Why not just use the C# compiler from .NET?
Well, if I had a way of making the official .NET framework compile to WebAssembly, I'm sure I would have done that. But as you can probably guess, the real CLR is a huge and complex project. It's not designed to just compile through a completely unknown toolchain like the mscript and C compiler. It is designed to build in one specific way for a specific set of platforms. That is, the regular CLR is for Windows only, and Core CLR supports a few other platforms, but it doesn't support WebAssembly. And it's such a big and sophisticated thing that it wasn't realistic for me to just make that work on WebAssembly. But .NET Anywhere, DNA, is tiny by comparison. The whole implementation of it is about 100 C files or something, which is just minuscule compared to the real .NET runtime. And yeah, it's because it's just plain old C source code and not even much of it. It wasn't that hard to compile it to WebAssembly.
Let's back up a little bit. And what does that mean exactly, compile to WebAssembly? Okay,
so the way that Blazor works, the way it runs your application, is obviously it's in the browser, and like we've been saying, it's WebAssembly. So WebAssembly is a bytecode format that browsers can run these days. All browsers now support it, including mobile browsers, and it's a low-level binary format for code. It's not JavaScript. It looks somewhat more like assembly, but it's not regular machine code. It's not x86 assembly, or it's not just running directly on the bare metal CPU. It's a bytecode, so it gets JIT compiled by the browser to run fast when the browser wants to run it. And the idea when you want to run an application on WebAssembly is that you compile your application to WebAssembly from some other language. And the most straightforward language to compile to WebAssembly from is C, although C++ is not too much harder. And it's not really surprising. Those are very basic low-level languages. And so you can compile from C to WebAssembly and you can run your code. And that's great. But if you want to run .NET inside a browser, how are you going to do that? Well, one approach would be that you could try and compile the actual .NET assemblies to WebAssembly directly. So you would somehow take all the MSIL instructions inside the .NET assembly and somehow convert it into a series of WebAssembly instructions. And that might well be viable. That would be called ahead-of-time compilation. That is where you're doing all the work ahead of time to translate that .NET code into WebAssembly. So the browser just runs it without needing to know that .NET even exists. And that's fine. But that's quite hard to do, or it's beyond what was available to me when I did that original prototype. An alternative approach would be not to compile your application to WebAssembly, but to compile the .NET runtime itself to WebAssembly. So the thing that loads and executes .NET assemblies is itself WebAssembly. And so then once you've got that running in the browser, it can load and run any .NET assembly that you feed into it. And that was the approach that I took. And it's not just handy as a way of getting a prototype working quickly, but it's also good as a realistic way of building your applications, because it means that you've got a very fast development cycle. If you're working on .NET code and you're in Visual Studio and you're on the command line, and then you want to do a compile, well, hopefully it only takes about 1 second or something for a reasonably small .NET project to compile to a .NET assembly. And once you've gone that, you can then load it into the browser, into the WebAssembly-based runtime there. So that's a nice fast development cycle. If you compare that to something like ahead-of-time compilation, you're probably talking more like a 20-second or full minute or so cycle every time you want to change your code and then do the whole ahead-of-time compilation. So that was why I took that approach originally, but it's also proven itself to work pretty well. So we're following that same approach with the real implementation of Blazor, at least for applications in development mode. We might have an ahead-of-time compile mode when you actually go to publish your application, if it turns out to run faster and be smaller.
So after DNA, you moved to the Mono framework somehow. How did that work?
Well, it was very, very easy for me because I didn't have to do anything, really. I just heard that the Mono team were going to support WebAssembly, which was great. And Dan somehow found the right people to talk to, and we managed to get some early builds of Mono for WebAssembly. And then it was only a short process of converting the existing Blazor runtime so that it would work on top of that Mono runtime instead of the DNA one. Mostly it just works the same. The only bits I had to change were the low-level interop bits where I'd sort of hacked my own weird ways of doing things in, and I had to just change it into the Mono way of doing interop, and it basically worked. So yeah, easy for us, hard for the Mono team.
Basically worked. I've never had that development experience with regular mere mortal software, let alone like this. So does that mean now that it supports Mono that there are more inherently available APIs?
Yeah, absolutely. Mono is a much more complete runtime than DNA ever was going to be. So Mono, obviously, it's been pretty battle tested in running on all kinds of different devices. It's the thing that powers all Xamarin applications. It's also behind all Unity games. It's an extremely complete implementation of .NET. It's also very well tested for all edge cases and to have the right performance characteristics and so on. So yeah, it's a far more stable base to build something on.
And they're really, investing hard into their WebAssembly support. Like they've been blogging about their progress. Steve mentioned the various modes that we can compile the C# applications, like ahead of time compilation or doing like an IL interpreter based approach. The Mono folks are doing all of that. And they have a variety of motivations for that. One is web development. I think they're also looking at the gaming world. Like imagine, building Unity games that run in the browser,
right?
Full 3D graphics running at, blazingly fast without any plugins needed. That's some pretty cool stuff that they're doing. So moving from DNA onto Mono has been a huge boon for us. Like it's a much more richer runtime environment, much broader set of API support, and it really makes a lot of sense. I mean, they really are, the client.NET platform for a lot of the client platforms that matter today, like mobile apps, Android, iOS, gaming. Right. Blazor is itself another client platform that happens to run on the browser. So it's really a pretty natural fit and natural partnership.
Hey guys, hold that thought for 1 second while we take a minute for this very important message. When you're building an application, you need it to be fast, secure, and always evolving. With Kubernetes Engine on the Google Cloud Platform, developers can deploy fully managed, containerized apps quickly and easily. Google has been running production workloads in containers for over 15 years, and they build the best of what they learn into Kubernetes, the industry-leading open-source container orchestrator. Kubernetes Engine combines automatic scaling, updates, and reliable self-healing infrastructure with open-source flexibility to cut down development cycles and speed up time to market. Learn more about Kubernetes Engine online at g.co/getgke. That's g.co/getgke. And we're back. It's .NET Rocks. Carl Franklin, Richard Campbell. We're talking to Dan Roth and Steve Sanderson about Blazor, the current state of it, and the announcement today that they're moving into the ASP.NET group on GitHub. And so what that means is that today, even as an update from the last time we talked about it, today all those APIs are available. So what are the limitations of Blazor right now?
Well, right now, Blazor as an application platform is not finished. It can only do the things that we've implemented, and it's not everything that we want to implement. So as of when I stopped working on it about half an hour ago, it displays user interfaces quite nicely, but it doesn't have certain basic features like layouts and routing. You need that sort of thing. It doesn't have project templates yet. It doesn't have any clearly defined patterns around things like state containers, forms and validation, just so many things. We're just getting started with this, really.
Yeah, it's still pretty early in the project. There's been a lot of important technical investigations into problem areas that we want to make sure that they can work. You mentioned debugging earlier. After Steve did his initial prototype, there was a big effort to see what we could do around getting .NET debugging to work in the browser. I think Steve and David Fowler spent quite a bit of time on this. And the cool thing is that they got it working, and it's not just not just debugging like in Visual Studio. It's both debugging in Visual Studio and in the browser. Like you can literally debug C# code and the JavaScript code through your browser debugger.
Wow.
Get IntelliSense breakpoints and so forth. So that was pretty exciting to see. We've also been doing a lot of experiments with JavaScript interop. One thing that's interesting is if you have an existing JavaScript library that you want to be able to call into from C#, like wouldn't it be nice if you could actually sort of shrink wrap it with a C# API surface area that you could then call as if that library was actually implemented in .NET and C#.
Oh.
That's something we've been looking at as well.
How cool would that be? Wow.
Yeah, I think you showed this in the demo back in June, Steve. Didn't you p-invoke to JavaScript?
Yeah, I think I was doing that. That was quite a low-level way of interrupt. The thing that Dan's thinking about is not having to deal with it at such a low level, but rather having some way of saying,
right,
oh, I want to use this particular JavaScript library, and then getting what looks like a C# class so that you can new it up and you can call methods on it, and you can just work with its entire API surface in a very natural way, driven by the tooling and IntelliSense that you are normally used to. Now, of course, we would still have the more low-level forms of interop available if people want that, but so it would be nice to not force you to go through p-invokes every time you want to talk to some other library.
Yeah, that sounds just like good old back in .NET 1.1 days, where it's like, could we just have a regular interface to this? Do I have to p-invoke to come? I just laughed. I remember talking about this back then and going, man, I haven't p-invoked in a decade. And now you're doing it to JavaScript. Are you crazy?
It's not crazy. It works. And actually, imagine that you have a tool that if you have a JavaScript library that, say, has TypeScript definitions, imagine you have a tool that can just read its TypeScript definitions, generate those C# wrappers for you,
right?
And all the the p-invoke like code underneath, so you can do it in a sort of automated way. You can take an existing library, take its TypeScript definitions, run it through the tool, and now you've got that strongly typed interface without maybe Microsoft or someone else having to go and implement it by hand for you. It's something that you can do in almost an automated fashion.
Yeah, no, that should absolutely be the way, and it just makes this all a level playing field. You'll have all these same bits everywhere. I'm still just trying to picture Knox's dream of end-to-end C#, what's going to end up being JavaScript no matter what?
That's a great question. I mean, you can really do anything that you want to in C#. I guess there are a couple places where today, just because of limitations of WebAssembly, the runtime infrastructure itself is leveraging JavaScript heavily.
Right.
For example, if you want to interact with the DOM, like you can't interact with the DOM directly from the WebAssembly-based code, but it still feels like you can because you can do JavaScript interop to enable like a DOM manipulation-based API, which is what we do today. It's actually been fun. Like a lot of people have sort of, I think, assumed at this point that, WebAssembly has hit its first, milestone of being supported in all the browsers, but, to really come of age and need sort of another wave of new features. So far, we've found that a lot of the limitations that you might think are there actually aren't blockers at all. Like we fully expect actually to be able to ship Blazor and the .NET WebAssembly support on top of the existing WebAssembly format as it stands today without any additional new features.
Awesome.
Now, there may be new features that they could add to the spec that would make things even better, and we're working with the working group on that, on, how can we make, .NET work even better on top of WebAssembly. But so far, everything that you would want to be able to do from a WebAssembly-based .NET runtime, it's totally feasible to do today.
Wow. And you just said it, Dan, but the implication or the goal here is just to make this another part of the ASP.NET development suite that you can just run C# in the browser as well.
Yeah, getting you an end-to-end story where you can write C# on the server, C# on the client, leveraging Razor as a syntax, hence the name Blazor, Razor in the browser. Mm-hmm. You can use it on both sides of the wire. Have a single page application framework where you're using normal web technologies, HTML, CSS, but also being able to write your logic in C# and Razor. That is the goal. Right. And actually, and at this point, what Blazor becomes, like I think in the past we've talked about Blazor as both the idea of being able to run some .NET code in the browser and also building that that web framework, the thing that you actually need to then get your job done when you want to write your app. At this point, Blazor moves to really focus on to be that web UI framework. The .NET in the browser part is going to be coming from our Mono friends. That's what they're working on. That's what Blazor will then build on top of. Mm-hmm. The job now for the ASP.NET team is to figure out, okay, what's the application model look like? What does the component model look like? How do you build a composable UI? How do you manage your state? How can we do that with tooling that just makes it super easy to get started and to author your components? How can we get that developer workflow super fast and iterative and a super small payload side when you download your app? Those are all the things that now that we have Mono as a basis to build on, that we can start focusing on so you can get that highly productive web development experience.
I got to think the challenge here is making sure the performance is fast enough. This feels like, and I'm not just thinking about the initial load, although clearly there's going to be a spike there. Can this code run as fast?
I think the performance of the runtime is probably, what remains to be seen. It's still very early in the project. Maybe there will be issues there. We do have to go through some layers in some cases, to interact with the JavaScript runtime. But for the most part, WebAssembly was designed to be fast. The whole point of WebAssembly is that you can take native code and run it in the browser at native speeds.
Right.
So runtime performance, maybe there'll be some issues, but that's not what concerns me the most. The thing that's more interesting right now is, making sure that we can get that download size to be, as small as possible, so that we're not, forcing you to download like 20 megs of stuff in order to get a .NET app running in the browser. That's really important. And then also making sure that your development experience feels fast and iterative. Like web developers just won't tolerate a 30-second compilation step in order to get their app to show up in the browser. They want to see, like, I changed my code, and in fact, it updated in the browser, and I didn't even do anything. I just saved the file, and magic happened.
Right.
And that's actually where you mentioned full stack development with like ASP.NET Core on the back end. That's where we're doing some investments to really make that possible. Like having development middleware on the server that enables the scenarios like, hot reload of code in the browser, enables things like pre-rendering of the views so that you get better performance, both when you're doing your development and also when you actually go into production.
So do you think that there's room for file access from System.io in a limited capacity. I mean, there's an API right now that, some browsers, most of the modern browsers support, but it's a little wonky. And, we all we're used to using System.io.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is one of those areas that I think we're going to have to really think hard about.
Right.
There's a tension between exposing the browser functionality to .NET code to C# in a natural way, in a way that has fidelity to what that browser API actually can do.
Exactly.
And then also trying to match that functionality where it makes sense to existing .NET APIs that people know and love. Like you brought up I/O and dealing with files. Does it make sense to try and map that to an existing browser concept? I think where we're at right now is that we're thinking that probably not, that will have too many inconsistencies with what you would expect from the API, that it will actually cause more harm than good.
Right.
But we still think you should, of course, have that browser specific API that lets you do anything that the browser has available to you from .NET and C#.
A general principle is that we're not trying to make the browser a sort of virtual machine that just runs all desktop software in some kind of magic transparent way. This is genuinely a web development framework, and so it works in the way that web developers would expect. It uses APIs that resemble regular web development, and we hopefully don't have too much crazy abstraction in between you, the developer, and the APIs that the browser offers normally. So the specific example of the file I/O thing, I think it's pretty unlikely that people would be happy if we just tried to magically simulate the normal system I/O behaviors inside the browsers. There may be other cases where we can do something that is a good enough match. And I think one good example is with HTTP client, where that's such a dominant API in .NET development as a way of working with HTTP, that you probably do want that to work, and we probably can get the semantics of it to be close enough that for every reasonable situation, we can make the browser make the correct HTTP requests and supply a response in the right way. There may be some edge cases where it won't work correctly, but we're falling on the side of saying, yes, we'll make HTTP client work via the browser, but perhaps not the System.io file APIs. But, it's all up for debate, and we're figuring this out as we go.
Wow. Hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is now?
It must be that happy time again.
It's time for you to go home and rethink your life.
I don't know if that was Obi-Wan or Ringo. I'm confused.
A well-forged alloy of the two.
They might be the same person.
Sorry, man. It's actually time to give away a D-Experience subscription from DevExpress to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. Become a UI superhero with DevExpress UI controls and libraries, and deliver elegant .NET solutions that address customer needs today, and leverage your existing knowledge to build next-generation touch-enabled solutions for tomorrow. Whether it's an Office-inspired application or a data-centric analytics dashboard, DevExpress Universal ships with everything you'll need to build your best, without limits or compromise. And check out their DevExtreme React Grid, built from the ground up to fully support all the cool features that come with React, like the virtual DOM and state controllers like Redux. It supports master detail, sorting, grouping, paging, and editing, and you can get it for free on GitHub. Learn more and download your free 30-day trial of DevExpress Universal at devexpress.com/superhero.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner, Richard, is Michael Romig.
Congratulations, Michael.
Yeah.
Golf clap for you, sir.
Golf clap for Michael.
A little clappers.
A little bit of clappers for Michael. So he just won the D-Experience subscription from DevExpress. That's a big pile of awesome from them, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world. In every show, we like to give away stuff from our sponsors, and every December, we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But you have to sign up to win, and we like to ask our guests, guys. This ought to be fun. Dan, if you had $5,000 to spend on technology today, what would you buy?
Whoa. $5,000. That's quite a bit. I've had my heart set on getting one of those augmented reality headsets for a while. Like I'd love to get, I think it's called the Meta 2 from the Metavision guys. That thing looks like something I'd love to play around with. Like I always envision sitting at my desk, and instead of having like a whole bunch of monitors in front of me, like just imagine I put on my augmented reality headset and I can put up as many virtual monitors as I want. I think that would be super sweet.
Very good. How about you, Steve?
Well, last time you asked me about that, I think I was saying I was thinking about putting up some, what do you call it, DC lighting to have LED lights all around my place. I have kind of done that actually. So yeah, a little update. It looks pretty good. I'm quite happy with that. But yeah, I guess if you're giving me even more money now, then maybe I can deck out the outside of my house as well. So I can have all kinds of cool blingy lights and, a big sort of laser light show going on all the time. I'm not sure the neighbors would like
that
it, but
is awesome. A laser light show at Steve's house all the time.
All the
time. People dancing in the yard. And
this whole putting up seasonal light things is too much work. You just need them hardwired into the house and you program it, right?
Right.
Even software is taking control of even the lighting.
It's eating the lights.
Wow. And with LED these days, actually, with those little laser assemblies, I picked up a couple of them in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
They were like little laser light show devices. And they must have been $50. We could go really nuts with that stuff now. Now you got me thinking about my place. Oh, no. How am I going to stay married?
I still need to do this at the studio.
Well, no, my favorite one of all of those things is the floating head of death. That was amazing.
That was pretty fun. Yeah.
That was hilarious.
We'll put a link to that. I essentially got a transparent screen for projection, and I put it over the inside. I taped it on the inside of my full-length glass door, and then I had a projector up above the door with a 45-degree angle mirror, and I adjusted the azimuth so that it would bounce down from the projector right into the door and be the right proportion. And then I basically had myself in the back room on a camera projected into the door. And I was also watching the security camera at the same time, which was above the door, so I could see the people. And then I hooked up a microphone, put some speakers under the deck so that I could actually speak and hear. And it was fantastic. And that was a Halloween prank, bar none.
10 years ago now. Yeah. But the cool moment is here's his head appears in the door,
right.
And you talk to the kids, and then when things sort of resolve and they're supposed to get their candy, somebody else just opens the door. The head just disappears. There was nothing there the whole time. It's like, what?
Wait a minute, and it can see you and comment on your costume. It's really creepy.
Yep.
Anyway, we digress.
There you go. Yep. Oh, I think we were talking about serious web stuff here. What was it exactly?
Are you opening this up? Obviously, it's on GitHub, but are you opening it up for people to help do pull requests and stuff? Or are you now just still in that experimental phase where you don't want to take on too many changes until you have a strategy going forward?
It's a real public GitHub repo. It has an issue tracker. We accept PRs. It's really early, so don't expect there's going to be a lot of documentation on how to build and stuff like that. But for those who are adventurous and want to try it out, feel free to clone and help us out with some contributions. We have you can check out our contribution guide. We do have that on the repo, so you can find some instructions there on if you want to submit a contribution.
So the kind of contributions you're talking about are maybe like filling out the base class libraries or things like that?
So the base class library work, that's all going to come from the mono runtime. So if you're interested in that part of the stack, like just fleshing out what it means to be .NET in the browser, you should go check out the mono project, and I'm sure they would appreciate the help as well.
Okay.
In the Blazor repo is where we're going to be focusing on the web UI framework, building composable UI, like a component model. That's where that part of the story is going to be developed. The integration also with ASP.NET Core for development experiences and so forth. So contributions there would be like if you have ideas on how the component model should work, how it integrates with Razor, how we manage states, how we deal with forms and validation. Then the Blazor repo is where you're going to want to go. So like think of existing spot frameworks like React and Angular. Like the Blazor is at that level of the stack, and then the .NET concepts like the BCL, the runtime, the IL interpreter. That would mean go help out the Mono guys, because we're just building on the good work that they're already doing.
So this is a historic moment. I mean, if you have any ideas that you want to contribute, you have an opportunity to shape the future of web development. I mean, you do that anyway, but...
That's right. And, we'd love to talk to people who are interested. If you want to join us on Gitter, we'll be there to chat with folks about the scenarios and requirements and things that you'd like to see Blazor do. Feel free to file issues in the issue tracker if you have specific feature requests that you'd like us to look at, or if you run into any issues once we actually have some bits out there for you to download and use. Again, it's still very early. We don't even have a download yet. So to even play with the bits at this point means trying to build yourself and run the tests yourself. So it's you have to be pretty adventurous to participate in the project at this point, but we're working hard to get to a place where more people can actually try it out themselves.
I was looking at the original Blazor project under Steve's repository, and I saw, oh, look, there's a bunch of contributors. There's like a dozen people contributing that. Then I look at the list, and it's David Fowler and Damian Edwards. Okay, yeah, I know who's contributing to this project.
Yeah, it's not just
Although
those.
It's interesting to see Steve Sanderson in his own project twice. So do you actually keep a separate account for your Microsoft open source contributions, sir?
Yeah, I do have a different GitHub account for that. Not for any particular reason, I suppose, in retrospect, but that was a choice I made 8 years ago when I first joined Microsoft. As for the people contributing to that prototype repo, yeah, we have had people like Damien and David Fowler and so on, but we've also had some really good stuff done from people who I didn't know before, who have come in and to try and take on some really tricky stuff about fixing bugs in the underlying DNA runtime, which is pretty impressive that happened. Also, I think there probably would have been a lot more community participation if it wasn't for the fact that right from the very beginning I turned off the issue tracker and put a notice on the homepage saying, like, don't talk to me about this, essentially.
Yeah, right. Yes, we know.
Yeah, I'm not the most sociable person, but no, the reason for that was because it was genuinely just thrown together, and it was not something that I was going to build into a realistic product. And so to have people come along going, oh, look, there's this little bit that's not right, that would not be helpful, since like 90% of it is not right. I don't really need that to be pointed out. But yeah, it's totally different with the new repo that's in the ASP.NET org. This is we absolutely want people to come and talk to us, and things that are not right, tell us, because it's all supposed to be right from here on.
Well, and I got to think the transformation was getting the Mono libraries in place. So suddenly you don't have to deal with a 6-year-old code base, and there's an ongoing piece of development around Mono that's constant. Like that is a very busy project.
Yeah, absolutely. That has totally changed it. Another thing that's changed the possibilities of what we can do is getting some other developers involved who know stuff that I don't know. For example, we've got one person on the ASP.NET team now who's probably the world's leading expert in ASP.NET tooling, and he's making it work really nicely. So when you're editing your code, you get all the right IntelliSense, and you got this really beautiful and fluid way of writing down your code to do with how components are composed together, with the right syntax and the right warnings if you do things wrong and everything like that. And that's just completely outside of my sphere of experience. I do not know how to make Visual Studio do all that stuff, but he does. And so we're able to make much faster progress now that we've got some of the right people involved.
Nice.
Do you guys plan to implement async and await, or is it already implemented?
It was already implemented, yeah. So, and that's a Mono thing, really. So,
yeah, sure.
So I know that there's some limitations in the support as of today in Mono for WebAssembly. We managed to work around them all up until now, but I think they're aware that they need to fix some of the, or to add some of the missing support that's underlying it. I'm pretty sure by the time people get to actually download and run this stuff, it will just behave the same as .NET normally behaves.
I saw one blog post from last fall, I think, that posed the question, will Blazor save the world from JavaScript insanity?
I can I respond to that one? Like, I think that's probably a little harsh. Like, I think the JavaScript folks have done a lot of good work.
Sure.
And they have certainly pushed forward the state of the art in web development quite a bit. I remember looking at JavaScript, I don't know, it was like a decade ago, and being a bit shocked and appalled at some of the things that you had to do at that point. And boy, have things really moved forward. Like at the time, it was like everything's in the global namespace, and the language had a bunch of limitations. And they've been moving forward the language. They've been building out. Like there are mature, large web frameworks like React and Angular and so forth that you can build web apps with today that are pretty phenomenal. What I'm excited about with Blazor and WebAssembly is it really just opens the door. Like it broadens what it means to do web development. It's no longer just JavaScript. I mean, JavaScript has a lot of strengths, and you can do a lot of things with JavaScript. But now, in addition, if you want to do C#, you can. And I expect that other development platforms will do very similar things. Like if you want to do Java in the browser, you can do that. If you want to do Python, absolutely. Like WebAssembly is a low-level bytecode that if you can compile it to WebAssembly, you can run it in the browser at native speeds. And that's what really gets me excited. Like it makes web development so much more open, so many more possibilities, so much more approachable to a lot of people. I do think it's an interesting question, though. Like, why .NET though? Like, why would you pick to use .NET for doing your web development? And Steve mentioned tooling, like the investments that we make in the tooling space. I think one of the areas that we're going to really try to differentiate is just have a phenomenal tooling experience. The Razor editor on steroids. Defining components and getting just great IntelliSense and rapid development workflow. I think those are areas that we hope to shine. Being able to use both .NET on the client and the server. Like .NET has had, I think, a really strong history as a server stack in terms of its security, reliability, and performance on the server. With Core, we can now run cross-platform. I think there's a lot of benefits there. The languages move pretty quickly and have really cutting edge in terms of the features that we add to C# and F#.
Right.
You mentioned async await. Like JavaScript does have, I believe now, async and async await patterns, but that came from the C# world. We had it for quite a while beforehand, and there's a lot of benefits in being able to innovate in the language space. So we hope that people will see what we're doing with .NET and they'll find it compelling and give .NET a try, maybe for the first time, that they've never maybe considered it before, but because of the opportunity to do full stack development, maybe it's becomes more interesting.
Well, and I got to think of historically, some people might call them dark matter developers, but the millions of developers that work in corporate America who were so focused on Windows for so long. And when .NET came along, those people followed suit and they got into .NET, they got into C# and VBNet and web forms. And, they could actually do some web forms because it was in the same, paradigm that we're used to working with. And then, all of a sudden, what happened? It's like to these people, from their point of view, it's like, wow, the world just went to the web and I am so lost, And a lot of these people obviously had to embrace all of the stuff that's been going on in the last 10 years. But then again, there's got to be a bunch more that are just like, nah, I think I'll just continue to maintain my server software and my Windows software. And so for these guys and ladies, I think, this represents an opportunity to get into it at, with using paradigms and tools. And especially if what you're saying is true, that you plan to Microsoftize this, and I say that in a good way, this developer experience.
Good. I was curious.
No, absolutely. Because the developer experience for Microsoft languages is just amazing. And, because I've done the other ones. And you guys just do the bit. That's where you shine. So if that experience can be analogous to things that we're already familiar with doing, and in the code that we're writing today, it's I think going to be amazing for the market.
Yeah, we want to make it turnkey, easy to do web development, both client side and server side. Easy to get started, just file a new project, fantastic tooling, great libraries, a great UI framework, a component model where you can grab existing components that it could anyone can produce and share, that you can use in your application. Try and really get that productivity back so that you can build on a web framework that that you love, that just feels right. That's the goal. That's the dream.
I mean, I seriously can imagine how I'd like it to work. And if you can get it to that level, you've got something amazing on your hands.
I guess the question, I guess maybe I'll throw that to Miguel Diaz if we get a chance, is there going to be a Xamarin Forms implementation that runs in WebAssembly? And we can get the full Silverlight experience.
That's an interesting question. You should ask him. I mean, this is a good distinction, though. Like, our goal is to, appeal to web developers who are familiar with HTML, CSS. Like, we're really focused on the web set of technologies. There's certainly another developer base that, likes XAML and is used to the XAML stack and, is building, Xamarin apps for iOS and Android, or UWP or WPF, and I'm sure there's people that would love to have a XAML-based UI stack as well. Whether that's going to happen, don't know, but I can certainly see the demand from a set of folks that would want that. But for Blazor, our goal is entirely focused on web technology approach. We're trying to appeal to people who are web developers today that know the set of web technologies, but but now they can write in C# and leverage the benefits of .NET. That's what we're trying to do.
And yeah, correct me if I'm wrong here, Daniel, but the only open source implementation that's even XAML-like would be Xamarin Forms. At this point, the main XAML stack is not open source.
As far as I know.
Not your problem.
As far as I know, yeah.
Sure. But I guess that's the interesting part, is just sort of recognizing that, well, we have this idea of XAML standard, which immediately implies at some point there's going to be an open source version of XAML, but Xamarin Forms is the closest thing, and they're not the same. So it's going to be interesting to see what XAML standard ultimately turns into. But that's a whole other show, I suspect.
Yeah.
We do plan to support .NET standard, though, in Blazor. So being able to take like a .NET standard 2.0 library, a class library, and just run it in a Blazor application, that is something that we do plan to do. I mean, there'll be obvious limitations because there are APIs in the .NET standard API surface area that don't really make sense in a browser. So those APIs would probably throw, platform not supported exceptions. But being able to take a library that supports .NET standard and use it in your app, that is something that will be supported.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Guys, it's been amazing and mind blown again. And I can't wait to see what happens with Blazor.
Yeah, it's early, it's experimental, but we're excited about the prospects as well.
I can't wait to see what name it takes on. Please make it a good name.
Well, you don't like Blazor? You don't think that?
Yeah, therein lies the problem. I think Blazor's a code name, and we know what happens when you have cool code names. You get terrible product names.
No. My plan is to use the word Blazor in as many places in the code as possible so that it becomes a breaking change if we change it, and we won't be able to.
Awesome.
I love that solution.
All right.
That's brilliant.
All right. Steve Sanderson, Dan Roth, thank you for joining us today. It's been amazing.
Thanks, guys.
All right. We'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Pwop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got a transmitter banned by the FCC.